It was still dark outside when Jasmine Crockett walked into Dallas Love Field. The time was just past 6:30 in the morning, and the world fell heavy on her shoulders. She had been running for weeks, committee meetings, round tables, town halls, flying from city to city with hardly a chance to breathe. But this trip wasn't about politics. This trip was about family. Her cousin Devin had passed away. He was only 42. To Jasmine, he wasn't just a cousin. He was a brother she grew up with, the one who was always there. Missing his funeral wasn't an option, no matter how tired she was. She moved through the terminal with quiet urgency. A simple black dress under a blazer, hair pinned neatly, coffee in one hand and her phone in the other. Her eyes skimmed over emails while her feet carried her toward the Southwest check-in desk. The flight to Jackson, Mississippi, was boarding in less than an hour. Her mother was already waiting. Devin's daughter had asked if Annie Jazz would say something at the service. Jasmine promised she would. She couldn't let her down. But before she even reached the gate, something small and sharp cut into her morning. The young man behind the counter looked up at her, then back at his screen and smirked. It wasn't long, just a flicker. But Jasmine knew that look. She had seen it 100 times in 100 different places. That single glance, dismissive, careless, was a first crack in what should have been a simple trip. She ignored it, held out her ID, and kept her voice calm. She was focused on getting to Jackson. What she didn't know was that the real journey was about to begin right there at the desk. The trouble started small, the way it always does. Jasmine handed over a boarding pass, but the agent frowned at the screen, as if something wasn't right. "You're not in the system," he said flatly. Jasmine blinked. She had checked in an hour earlier. Her boarding pass was right there on her phone. Calmly, she slid the phone across the counter. "Here's my confirmation," she said. The agent barely looked before shrugging. "Your seat's been reassigned. You'll have to wait." "Reassigned? To what?" He didn't answer. Instead, he leaned back and waved for another worker to come over. Jasmine checked the clock, 6:43. Time was slipping away, and every second mattered. She reminded them, gently, that she had a funeral to attend. The second employee barely looked at her. "She's flagged for random review," she said. Cold, robotic, like Jasmine wasn't even a person. Jasmine stayed calm, but her chest tightened. She'd flown this route 4 times this year. Never once had she been flagged. She pulled out her government ID, but the staff dismissed it. "ID doesn't override protocol," one of them said. Then the words that always cut deep. "Ma'am, if you don't calm down, I'll have to ask you to step aside." Phones were out now. Passengers behind her whispered, "That's Congresswoman Crockett." But it didn't matter. The staff didn't care. They waved to security. Jasmine hadn't yelled, hadn't broken a single rule, but now she was being treated like a threat. 2 TSA officers appeared, walking with that slow, heavy pace that already assumed guilt. "Ma'am, you need to come with us," one said. She tried again, steady voice, no anger. "I have a funeral. I've done everything required. This is official travel." The officer repeated, "We're not asking." Her heart sank. Her flight was boarding in minutes. Her family was waiting. Devin's daughter was waiting. And here she was, pulled away like a criminal, watched by strangers holding up their phones. What should have been a simple morning was turning into humiliation in plain view. Jasmine sat in a cold hallway, her bag half unzipped, her blazer wrinkled, and her flight long gone. She had done everything they asked. She stood still while they searched her bag, held her arms out while they patted her down, and kept her voice calm. But none of it mattered. She wasn't on that plane to Jackson. She wasn't at her cousin's funeral. She was sitting under flickering fluorescent lights, treated like she was less than human. That was when the doors opened. A tall figure walked in, wearing a dark gray coat and the maroon scarf Jasmine had bought him last Christmas. Franklin Rhodes, retired federal judge. Her husband. He didn't storm in or shout. He didn't have to. His presence alone changed the air in the room. He looked first at Jasmine. "Are you okay?" he asked. She nodded once, though the weight in her eyes told the truth. Franklin turned to the officers. Who's in charge here? His voice wasn't loud, but it carried like a hammer. The officer hesitated, then stammered, one moment. Franklin's questions cut through the silence. Why was my wife's seat reassigned? Why was she pulled? Why was her ID ignored? The staff shuffled, their excuses weak. She wouldn't stand down, one muttered. Franklin stepped closer. Did she shout? No. Did she threaten anyone? No. He leaned in just enough. Then you escalated for no reason. You ignored a federal badge. You detained a congresswoman without cause. That's not protocol. That's targeted humiliation. Passengers gathered at the edge of the hallway. Phones raised. Videos captured the moment the tide turned. The same staff who smirked earlier now avoided eye contact. The apologies began. Offers of rebooking, upgrades, first-class seats. Jasmine shook her head. Franklin's voice stayed steady. She doesn't need a better seat. She needed dignity 20 minutes ago. The room froze. The weight of his words hung heavy. Everyone knew this wasn't about a seat anymore. It was about something much bigger, and now the whole world was watching. By the time Jasmine and Franklin walked out the terminal, her phone was buzzing nonstop. Missed calls from family, texts from staff, even messages from reporters who had already seen the videos. But Jasmine ignored them. She wasn't thinking about headlines. She was thinking about her cousin's funeral, about the promise she had made to speak, and about the empty seat in Jackson where she should have been. In the parking lot, she paused by the car, suitcase at her side. Franklin stood quietly, watching the sliding doors behind them. They didn't expect me to show up, he said, voice low. Jasmine answered softly. They didn't expect anyone to care. She nodded, but it wasn't the kind of nod that meant she was okay. It was the kind that meant, I'll be okay later. Inside the terminal, the ripple had already begun. Clips of Jasmine being escorted by TSA, calm and steady, were everywhere online. Another video showed Franklin demanding answers. Strangers were sharing the story faster than any apology could catch it. And in the comments, something powerful was happening. People were telling their own stories. Teachers, nurses, veterans, grandparents, all of them describing times they'd been brushed aside, disrespected, treated as less. Jasmine's story had become theirs. Later that night in her hotel room, she scrolled through headlines she didn't want to read. Congresswoman pulled from flight. Airline under fire. She didn't need the news. She had lived it. What caught her breath were the comments. Voices of people who understood. Voices that said, this happened to me too. She realized then that this wasn't just about one missed flight or one funeral. It was about something larger. The way dignity gets denied so easily unless someone forces the world to see it. And she had forced them to see. Franklin's words came back to her. Real power is knowing who you are, even when they try to strip it away. That was a lesson, not just for her, not just for the airline, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel small. So when Jasmine sat later with a group of young interns in Washington, she didn't tell them about laws or committees. She told them about Gate 22B, about silence, about standing tall even when the world wants you to shrink, because respect is not a prize. Dignity is not optional, and no one, not a teacher, not a nurse, not a grandmother trying to bury her brother, should ever have to fight for the simple right to be treated like they matter. That was the real ending. Not the misflight, not the apologies, but the reminder that how we treat people when no one is watching says everything about who we are when everyone is.